everyone. Welcome back to the Art of Business English. It's Andrew Ambrosius here again for another episode. And today we're going to be looking at some skills to help you check and clarify when you don't understand, okay? So for me, this is really one of the most useful skills for many business situations. You can use it in meetings, you can use it on telephone calls, okay? And the objective really is to make you feel more confident and to improve your communication skills, okay? So have you ever found yourself in a situation where you're not clear with what someone has said to you? Or have you ever had problems as a result of poor communication? If so, then you will love the tips I have for you in this episode today, okay? And what we're going to cover basically is that by the end of this episode, you will be able to do the following, all right? Check that you have understood what someone has said to you. Ask for clarification in a polite and constructive way. And finally, to clarify what you are trying to say to someone, okay? So let's take a look then and look at some skills for checking and clarification of meaning. All right, many people often feel uncomfortable when they don't understand, okay? I'm sure you're all in that situation. And this is especially the case when you're speaking and it's not, when you're speaking to native people and you're not using your native language, okay? Because people become self-conscious, and instead of asking for clarification, they generally say nothing, which is not a good idea. Or even worse, they ask the person to repeat themselves again and again. Could you please repeat that? All right. So there are some issues with the following expressions in English, in my opinion. Could you please repeat that? Not great. Sorry, what did you say? I don't understand you. Can you say that again? What is the problem with this? Well, basically, if you ask someone to repeat what they said, you're inviting them to say exactly the same thing, okay? And the issue is that if you didn't understand the first time, it's very probable that you won't understand it the second time, okay? So this can lead to even more embarrassment and problems with communication. And it's also quite frustrating, okay, if you have to repeat and repeat and repeat. The first thing, basically, that you need to remember as a non-native speaker is that the person that you're speaking to, they have an obligation to make you understand, okay? You shouldn't feel nervous and bad about your English, okay? You could easily say to the other person, can we speak my native language? And 99% of the time, the other person won't speak your language, okay? So it's their duty to make sure you understand their message. And of course, this is even truer in situations where they're trying to sell you something, okay? So you should feel a bit confident in the knowledge that, everyone at the table has a responsibility to be understood and to understand, okay? So what can we do to avoid using the famous "could you please repeat that" expression? All right, so below I'm going to show you. Let's take a look then at the first point of this episode, which is checking, all right, comprobando. So sometimes people get so nervous that they actually think they haven't understood something, okay? People get very nervous. They're like, oh my God, I need to understand every single word in English. No, this is not true. In fact, you probably have understood 40, 50% of the conversation. So before you ask someone to repeat something, you need to check with them what you think you understood, okay? This is really important because it gives you much more confidence, okay, if you check with someone. So let's look at some expressions that we can use for checking understanding, all right? Okay, I think I understand you, but could you say that last point again? Next one. I think it's clear, but did you say 15 or 50? Okay, so you're checking. Sorry, I think I understand you. You said we could have the contract signed by next week. Is that correct? So again, you're clarifying and checking what you think you understood. Okay, much, much better than saying, sorry, could you please repeat that? that sounds correct, but could you give me another example? All right. So even if you didn't understand the first example, you probably understood a little bit. So just ask them for another example, and that will hopefully clarify the situation, and you won't feel embarrassed about not having understood the first example. Another one. Did you say the project will be finished next week? Can you explain that in a bit more detail so it's clear? Okay, so remember, when we're trying to clarify dates or the timings of projects, it's very important that it's clear, because we don't want to have some confusion on the dates, because then maybe we think we have more time to finish something than we do. All right, next one. I agree with your first point, but could you explain your last point a bit slower to make sure I understood it? All right, so again, you understood a little bit, but you want them to explain the second one, and you're asking them to speak a bit slower. Can I just double check I understood that? You said da da da. Okay, so double check is obvious, no? Comprobarlo dos veces. And then what we can also do in this situation is repeat a little bit about what they said to you. So you said tal tal tal, and then the person can interject or interrupt you and clarify what they said. Next one. Could I just check I have clear what you said? So could I just check I have clear what you said? You mean da da da, didn't you? Or you mean da da da, don't you? So this didn't you and don't you is a tag question. We put it at the end of a sentence, and it's a way to prompt someone, all right? Prompt a response from someone, and it's very good for checking and clarifying. When you said da da da, did you mean, this is very important, instead of saying I didn't understand that word, you tell the person, or you repeat what the person said or what you think the person said, and then you tell them what you understood, and then that gives them an opportunity to clarify your understanding, okay? Much more confident than just saying, I'm sorry, could you please repeat that? And finally, do you mean this week or next week, okay? Do you mean? So what you can see here is that I'm showing the other person that I have understood some of what they are saying, or I'm asking to make sure I understand what they have said, okay? So two things. I've understood some of it, and I'm asking for additional information, or I'm checking with them that what they said I have understood correctly. Okay, so to take control of a conversation and to feel more confident, you need to ask questions, okay, and push the responsibility back to the other person, okay? The other person will then be able to respond. If you tell the person what you think you understood, they will then be able to confirm or correct you, okay? Much better and much more constructive than just saying, I'm sorry, I didn't understand that. Please tell me again. All right? It's a much more effective way to advance the conversation. Okay, so secondly, you will feel more involved in the conversation, okay? Much more involved instead of sitting there quiet. And you'll also feel more confident if you're able to clarify what you mean. It's important also to clarify regularly. A common complaint I get from my students is that they feel the conversation moves too fast. Okay, they're trying to understand a point, and by the time they think they have understood a point, the conversation has moved along considerably, and they still are trying to understand the first part of the conversation. So they are trying to understand a point, and the other person speaks quickly, and basically they get lost. Okay, so if you stop the other person more regularly, okay, so more often, to check understanding, then you can control the speed of the conversation. That's what's very important for language learners to appreciate. By being confident, asking questions, and checking regularly for understanding, you are in fact controlling the speed of the conversation, and you're also controlling the conversation, okay? So very important technique that. Now let's look at the next part of this episode, which is asking for clarification in a polite and constructive way, okay? So this can often be the most difficult part of any meeting, conference, or telephone call, okay? We often feel embarrassed or even self-conscious when we need to ask for clarification. Now, the most important thing is to avoid simply asking for repetition. As I mentioned earlier, if we do this, then it is possible that the person will repeat exactly what they said. If we didn't understand the first time, then we will not, or we'll probably won't understand it the second time, okay? So let's look at some of these constructive sentences that we can use to ask for clarification. Let's go. First one, I'm afraid I don't understand. Could you explain that again a bit slower? Okay, so you're asking them to explain it again, not repeat it, but again and a bit slower, all right? What does da-da-da mean? So what does insert the word? Could you provide me an example? Okay, again, we're asking for examples. Can you explain that another way? Again, so that's asking the person to use different vocabulary. Okay, can you provide me an example of that? All right, so they've said something, maybe you haven't really understood it. So instead of saying, I didn't understand that, just ask for an example. Maybe then it becomes clearer. What does USP stand for? So often with acronyms, we're confused about their meaning. So this, what does something stand for, basically is what does it mean, and then we can spell out the acronyms, all right? So how would that work in practice? Again, this to work in practice is basically asking someone to give you an example of how something will work, okay? And that is much better than just saying, I'm sorry, I don't understand how that will work. So you ask them how it will work in practice, and then they will give you maybe a bit more of a detailed explanation of the process. Sorry, how do you spell that? All right, so we say, how do you spell that when we're not sure how we spell a word or a person's name. Very important on the phone, or if we're trying to take some notes on something important. I'm afraid I didn't catch that. Could you explain it again? All right, catch is not literally catching something that's been thrown to you. It means to catch something in terms of understanding, okay? So again, you can explain it again. I'm afraid is me temo, okay? So I'm afraid I didn't catch that. Could you explain it again? Could you say that again, but a bit slower? So here we are asking for repetition, but we're asking them to do it a bit slower. So maybe they would take the cue, or take the hint, and do it in a slower way using different vocabulary. Does that blah, blah, blah mean blah, blah, blah? Okay, so when we understand a word, when we think we understand a word, we can say, does this word mean this or this? Okay, so we're giving two options, this or this, and then the person can clarify if it's this or that. Maybe it's not this nor that, but at least the person then has an opportunity to clarify what they mean, and you don't sound like someone who doesn't understand anything by saying, I'm sorry, I didn't understand that word. Can you tell me to explain it to me again? Okay, so again, here you'll see that by asking questions, we are making the other person improve their communication skills, okay? We can also then feel more confident and not so embarrassed about not understanding. And it's also important to remember that communication is a two-way street, okay? We should never feel that we have 100% of the responsibility for understanding. The other person also has the responsibility to make us understand their message. Very important to remember that, okay? Now, let me look at the last point of this episode, which is clarifying what you are trying to say, okay? So, finally, it's also important to clarify what you are trying to say, okay? I've often found that when we are talking another language, and this, trust me, has happened to me, we realize that we are sounding more and more confusing, okay? Sometimes as you just get into the worst of leos, okay? I've often done this myself. You're talking and you're like explaining something and you know what you want to say, but the words are coming out in a very confusing way. And then, you know, even though it's something relatively easy that you're trying to explain, for some reason you make it overcomplicated, it's convoluted, and basically your dialogue turns into a disaster. Now, the good thing is that most people are aware of this. They know they're sounding confusing. So there is some techniques that we can use to avoid this. And the first and most simple one is to stop. Okay, just stop what you're saying. All right, stop the Leo. Right, and then we can use one of the following expressions. All right, to clarify what we are trying to say. All right, ready? Sorry, what I'm trying to say is, this is my favorite. I've used this many times. It's like, lo siento, perdona, lo que quiero decir es, okay? It's as simple as that. You just stop and then you do like a mini reset, and by saying what I'm trying to say is, and then you start again. And often the second time, it sounds much better. What I wanted to say was, okay, that's another. What I wanted to say was, another one. Let me just explain that another way. Okay, so you're admitting that you're sounding confusing. Sorry, when I said da da da, I actually meant da da da. Okay, so you clarifying again what you mean. I'll just explain that again. All right, so you're admitting that you've made a bit of a mistake there, so you explain it again. Oops, I got a bit confused there. I meant to say da 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 da. So it's very important to admit that you got confused. Don't be shy or feel bad about admitting that you've got confused. Did you understand that? Very important. If you want to check understanding, ask the person. Ask the person. Say, did you understand that? Okay, very simple. Was that clear, or should I explain it again? Okay, again, asking them, was it clear? I mean, many people won't tell you. They'll just sit there and look at you and say, this guy or this girl, they're crazy. I don't understand a word they're saying. Do you get what I mean? Okay, again, do you get what I mean? Very open and honest. I think that was a bit confusing. Would you like me to tell you again? Okay, again, you're admitting that it was possibly confusing. Is that all clear, or should I go over it again? Remember, to go over something is repasarlo. So, important. Remember that by asking questions, we can get answers. Very simple. Secondly, people often feel embarrassed to correct you. So a great tip is to admit that it was confusing and then ask the other person if they would like you to explain it again. People are often too proud to admit that they didn't understand something. So it's very important to read body language and facial expressions. If you see someone is not really understanding you, then stop and use one of the above expressions to start again. Okay, it's very important. People often just sit there, they're trying to understand you, they don't say anything because they're being polite, but you need to be sensitive to that and basically stop, admit you've made a mistake, and start again. So, some study tips before we finish this episode. I'd like to conclude by offering you some tips. Basically, we need to remember that we should make a conscious decision to use 1 or 2 expressions a week in our meeting or telephone calls. Okay, it's extremely important to remember this, and I'm going to repeat this a lot over the years. If we set small learning goals that are achievable, then we will stay motivated, all right? Every day we can achieve small things, and this will ensure we continue to learn at a steady pace, all right? It's very difficult to say, I'm going to wake up every day at 5 o'clock in the morning, and for the next month, that will be my routine. I mean, maybe for you, it's difficult to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning. So set realistic objectives, small achievable goals. Okay, that's the key to improving your English. So final thoughts. Well, thanks again for joining us. Okay, we hope that your checking and clarifying tips here have been helpful, and they'll help you to improve your communication skills. Remember, the most important thing to remember is that you need to be confident. Okay, confidence is key. You need to be asking questions and making sure you understand, and also that you are understood. Sitting in silence will only lead to problems and you feeling terrible. Okay, jump in and start asking questions to gain more confidence and clarify what you don't understand. Okay, and as always, if you found this episode interesting, then please share it with your friends. That's how AOBE can reach more people and help them improve their business English. Personally, I love getting your feedback. I love your questions and your comments. So please do not hesitate to send us any of your questions, write any comments on the post that accompanies this podcast. Okay, if you're reading the post, then write your comments or questions there. And you can also contact us on our Facebook page at facebook.com/the AOBE. And of course, until next time, keep enjoying having fun and improving your business English. Take care and bye for now.